scripture reading this morning is taken from Exodus chapter 1, verses 8 to chapter 2, verses 10. And the situation is that Joseph had come to Egypt, and he rose in power because he saw Pharaoh's dream with 7 years of feast and 7 years of famine. And his family came over, so did other Jewish people. And many hundreds of years later, there became a problem in Egypt. And Tissa and I will read the scripture passage together. Now, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal surely with them, or they will increase and, in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built supply cities, Pithom and Ramses for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in every kind of field labor. They were ruthless in all the tasks that they imposed on them.
The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, "When you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a boy, kill him, but if it is a girl, she shall live." But the midwives feared God. They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this and allowed the boys to live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them." So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, "Every boy that is born to the Hebrews you shall throw into the Nile, but you shall let every girl live."
Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him for 3 months. When she could not hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him.
The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her attendants walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. "This must be one of the Hebrews' children," she said. Then his sisters said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son. She named him Moses because she said, I drew him out of the water.
One of the things that has truly been disturbing was not so much that Donald Trump was elected as the president of the United States and that he became the de facto leader of the world, of the free world. What was even more disturbing for me was that over 85% of the white evangelical Christians voted for him, and they continued to support him. When Donald Trump tear gassed the protesters so that he could pose for a photo holding up a Bible, the minister of the church said, rather than holding up a Bible for a photo op, he should open the Bible and read it. Anyways, I simply cannot fathom why anyone would support a pathological liar who declared bankruptcy 4 times and who is also morally bankrupt. Yet the Bible-loving evangelical Christians continue to support him. This had led me during my sabbatical to study and think more about what authentic faith really entails. Practicing Christian faith is not easy. Gilbert K. Chesterton once said, "The Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and left untried." Ultimately, faith is not so much practiced in the church, but in the day-to-day life lived in the home, in the markets, voting stations, and in workplaces. Faith is practiced in the everyday situations that challenge our deepest values and test our moral compass. The Hebrew midwives had a huge moral dilemma on their hands. The Pharaoh, who felt threatened by the increasing Hebrew population, tried to use Hebrew midwives to kill Hebrew male babies. The midwives had to make a choice. Do they follow the orders from the most powerful person in the land and kill? Or do they defy that order and deal with the consequences? What are the consequences? They could be thrown in jail. They could be killed. If they were to obey Pharaoh, then they too will have to deal with the consequences as well. They would become monsters in their own community, and they will be deeply despised. Furthermore, no one would trust them as midwives nor as human beings. They would also have to deal with their own conscience and what their soul would become as a result. The third option for them is to simply resign and refuse to participate in the evil acts. The Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, were God-fearing women, as it says in the Bible. They cared more about God than Pharaoh or their livelihood, even their own lives. They were willing to defy such gruesome orders to kill in order to keep their jobs. Even though the 10 Commandments were not written yet, they knew what was right and what was wrong. Acting on their principles took a huge amount of courage because so much was at stake for themselves if they did not obey Pharaoh and the lives of the families if they were to kill. In the end, they obeyed their conscience and defied the order. Justifying their defiance, they told an amusing story about how Hebrew women's babies popped out long before they got there, and Pharaoh bought the story. Pharaoh realized that the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, could not or would not do the dirty work of killing Hebrew babies. So then he ordered the slaughter of all baby boys by throwing them in the Nile River. In short, this was genocide fueled by racism as well as political fears. In that midst, Moses' mother placed her infant son in a basket and allowed the current to take him wherever it may. The basket ended up with the daughter of Pharaoh of all people, and she ends up keeping the baby, despite knowing how her father feels about Hebrew people and their babies. The Bible said the princess took pity on the crying baby. Pity is usually a judgmental word that describes feeling sorry for others. In this case, the princess felt deep emotion of sorrow towards a helpless baby. She could not let the baby die, so she decides to keep the baby for herself. Then Miriam, Moses' older sister, carefully watching the whole episode, enlists her own mother to nurse the baby for a fee. It was brilliant. The rest is history, they say. Moses goes on to become one of the most important figures in Jewish history. He not only freed his people from slavery, he was also the one who brought the Ten Commandments, and he led his people to the Promised Land. If there was no Moses, there would have been no Judaism, and no Christianity, and no Ebenezer. The world would have been totally different. It is also incredible to think about all the things that could have gone wrong. What if a crocodile came by for some breakfast? What if the wind blew strong that day and the basket shot past the water where the princess was bathing? What if the princess had a different schedule that day and someone else noticed the baby? What if the current was a bit strong and the basket overturned, or that the basket broke apart? All these would have changed the world. Yet it didn't. Instead, so many things went right, starting with the midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, the creativity of Moses' mother, the Egyptian princess, and the watchfulness of Miriam. The work of women usually are not well valued, even in the Bible, but in this case, it was all women. Though they may not realize it at that time, they played an incredible role in shaping history while unconsciously doing the work of God. Speaking of courageous women, I am reminded of the Wall of Moms, who stand courageously with the protesters in Portland, Oregon, against the racism and police brutality in the United States. The moms chose to stand together, forming a wall protecting the protesters against the police. The group was founded by Bev Barnum, a Portland mom who decided to use her body, her status as a mother, as a shield between the police and protesters. They knew their presence, their maternal bodies would make a difference, but it wasn't just their motherhood after all, as Barnum pointed out. Black mothers have been there protesting injustice for more than 50 days. They had been tear gassed. Only when white moms were also tear gassed did people all over become horrified. Yet, despite it all, the women continue to show courage. Moms in other cities were also inspired and they also took to the streets. So hooray for moms. In the midst, Christ was there, so were the Hebrew midwives, Miriam, and countless other women of faith. Practicing Christian faith may not be so easy at times, but we gain courage by the highest ideals, noblest of causes, and deepest compassion. At the heart of it all, God is there giving us the strength of conviction and the courage to live out our faith. Therein lies the source of authentic faith. Thanks be to God.